Alright, so we're back in the lab today and we're working again on the Apple IIgs. Last episode I got this 2GS successfully net booting from an old Powerbook 165. And I've been working with this setup now for a couple days and I'm really pleased with it. And I want to show you it and show you how fast it is and all these kind of things because I'm really impressed with this setup. So once we're booted up into GSOS, we can mount an AppleShare volume from any AppleShare server on the local talk network. So to do that, we go up here to the Apple menu, go to Control Panels, select AppleShare, go to open that control panel, and that'll let us select our server we want to connect to. So I want to connect to my PowerMac G3. And we'll get logged on here. Now I want to mount this G3 work volume. And the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that this is G3 no space work. In previous videos, I had laid out my partition table and I named this volume G3 space work. And what I found is that not all programs tolerated the space in the volume name. Some did, some didn't. So for maximum compatibility on the 2GS, I decided to remove the space from the name. So it's now just G3 work with no space in it. And I'm going to rename the rest of my volumes too here eventually, but this was the first one that I'm working on. And I'd recommend you do that too. So we'll mount this volume and it should come up pretty quick. And now if we look in here, we can see all of the files that are available on this volume on the PowerMac G3. So let's go switch over to the PowerMac G3 to download some files that we can use on the 2GS, some applications, some disk images, things of that nature. Alright, so we're back on the PowerMac G3, and the PowerMac is a nice bridge machine because it has connectivity to the internet and it has browsers on it. Now, not modern browsers, mind you, Internet Explorer 5 and Netscape Communicator 4, but you can still use those to download a lot of files from the internet. The big caveat there is that they don't support sites encrypted with the modern SSL protocol, so some sites are kind of off limits, but a lot of this kind of retro tech is hosted on mirrors that are unencrypted, so you can still get pretty far with just those ancient browsers. Alright, so let's download some software for the 2GS and get it transferred over. My first resource for this here is something called mirrors.apple2.org.za. This site is really fantastic. The maintainers of this site have mirrored many historical FTP archives and other kinds of sites, and it's just a wealth of software and documentation and pictures and all kinds of stuff. It's really great. So the first piece of software that I want to get actually comes from the official Apple FTP site. Now this FTP site is no more, so we're looking at a historical mirror of it here. And this piece of software is called Shrinkit. So Shrinkit is an archiver. It's like Stuffit for Mac or LHA for Amiga, and Apple used to distribute this on their FTP site. It's used pretty commonly in 2GS software, so it's a must-have. Now, one of the nice things about doing this on a Mac is you'll notice this file I just downloaded is a .bin file. Now, I don't want to go into Mac binary and bin hex right now. That's a whole complicated topic. But needless to say, if we were to just download this file as is, it would not work on the 2GS. A Mac binary file has to go through a translation before it's usable. But because that was a fairly common operation on Macintoshes, the browser has done that for me automatically. So this is not a .bin file anymore. Well, that's a nice little handy feature doing this on a Mac. So let's get some other software. And maybe this weekend I want to try dabbling in some Pascal programming. So we also have the Asimov.net archive here, and this is a wealth of emulators and disk images and other stuff. It's another good resource that's mirrored here. And if we go look in images, GS, programming, Pascal, we have the TML Pascal 2 environment here. So this is a 2MG file, so that's a disk image, and there's several file formats for Apple II disk images for emulators. The Apple II emulator community never coalesced around a single file format like the Amiga community did with the ADF format. So 2MG is one of the many formats. It seems like it's mostly used for 3.5-inch disks for the Apple II GS. And we can work with this. So let's download this disk image and we can play around with Pascal a little bit. Now in order to write that image to a disk, we're going to need another utility. And unfortunately this utility site is encrypted, so I can't get to it directly on this browser. So I've downloaded it locally to my file server. I will drop a link to where to get this file from in the video description. But this program is called Disk to File, and so it, as the name implies, it can take a disk and create an image file from it. It can also do the reverse. It's very handy. It's a very useful utility. So we're going to download this, and it's packaged as a Shrinkit archive. So we'll need Shrinkit to extract it to actually use the program. Alright, great. So we've got our 3 files here. Let's copy them over to this G3 work volume. And then I'm also going to rename this TML Pascal.2mg file. And you'll see why when I actually use this. But we're just going to rename this to Pascal.2mg. That'll be a lot easier for me to type in when the time comes. Alright, with that done, let's go back to the 2GS. Now that we've copied those files over to the work volume, we can see them. And the first one we want to run here is this Shrinkit one. So this is a .sea, which stands for Self-Extracting Archive. And so if we run this program, we should be able to extract the Shrinkit binary and a README and all the other files in that archive so we can use it. And we'll extract this to the root of the G3 work volume. We're going to create a little bit of a mess here. Normally I would organize my programs better, but that doesn't make for good viewing. So we'll just create a mess and I'll organize it later. Now I want to point out that I'm not cutting any of the Apple II GS footage here. And that's because I want you to get a sense of the speed of this system. From my perception, this is faster than running off of floppy disks. I haven't done any tests to verify that, but it certainly feels that way. Now, I'm sure that if you had a hard disk or hard disk emulator, that would be much faster than this setup. But I didn't want to have to buy one of those. So for me, this is still a net win because I don't have to buy that piece of hardware. And I feel like it's more flexible in general. Alright, so that's extracted and that's kicked us back to Finder. So now that we have Shrinkit, we should have a gshrink program, which we do right here. And now we can extract our disk to file program. So let's run this. And from here we can go File, Open Archive, disk to file.shrink, And I'm going to do Apple A or Command A to select all the files here, and then we're going to extract them. And like before, we'll extract them to the root of the G3 work volume. Alright, so now that's done. I can exit out of Shrink It. And I could do Apple Q, or I could go up here to the menu and hit Quit. And this will kick us back into Finder. Alright, so now we're ready to write that Pascal disk image. And I'm going to insert in a disk now. This is just a spare floppy that I had. I've already formatted it, but I kind of wanted to show you before and after, right? So now it's empty, right? There's nothing on here. So let's go write something to it. So now we should go into G3 Work, and since we extracted our disk to file archive, we have this disk to file program here. Let's run this. Now this isn't a GSOS program, this is a ProDOS program. But we can still access AppleShare volumes. So if you notice up here in the prefix it has /G3work/, that's our AppleShare volume. Alright, so let's do some things here to get us set up to where we can write this image. So first we need to toggle that this is a 2MG image, and we can do that by pressing 5. Next, we need to set the slot number for our drive. The 3.5-inch drives are by default on slot 5. Everything else looks good, so if we hit the number 2, that'll take an image file and convert it to disk. And now you can see why I renamed that disk image earlier. Pascal.2mg is a lot easier to type in here than the previous name. So we'll hit enter. We've already entered in our disk, so we've hit enter again. And now it's off to the races. So this part I will cut because it takes a while and it's not that interesting to watch a disk write. But before I cut, I just want to remark upon what we're doing here, right? We loaded a ProDOS 8 executable from an AppleShare volume. Right? Not from a disk, not from a hard disk, but over the network. We loaded and ran this program. And then we've instructed this program to read a disk image from a share over the network and write it to a disk. And all of this is pretty seamless. To me, for a machine of this vintage, that's amazing. Alright, so that disk wrote successfully. We can hit enter here to return to the menu. Now, if I wanted to do other operations, write some more disks or read some more disks, I could. But I'm going to hit 0 to exit to ProDOS. Now, really what this will do is exit to the last program, which happened to be the Finder. So we'll get kicked back into Finder. Alright, and now you can see that we have our disk written, TML Pascal, and we can, if we want to, use this. So we'll maybe do some Pascal stuff later. But I wanted to remark here just on how seamless this whole experience is, right? Moving between the Mac OS and the Apple IIgs, and the fact that all this network stuff just works. I mean, this is a computer that's from the late 80s, right? Now, GSOS 6, which I'm running, is released in 1993, right? So it's very much towards the tail end of the Apple IIgs's lifespan. This would have not been the experience for a large portion of the IIgs's lifetime. But still, even the fact that this is all possible on a system of this vintage really is incredible. And I think that I can expand this even further, right? There are Apple Share servers available for Linux, and I could try to get the 2GS reading directly from a Linux server, which would be even cooler then, because I could have access to modern browsers and things like that, and it would make the file transfer process even that much easier. I may try and get all that set up here at a later date, but I'd imagine it pretty finicky to do that. So we'll see. But still, I'm just in awe of this setup right now. And I hope that you are too, and I hope you found this interesting. So this has been a really great setup. And I've even been able to copy several files from ancient disks of my grandfather. These are Apple DOS 3.3 disks that he wrote a bunch of documents on. However, I started doing that, and then all of a sudden, my disks started to fail. So all of these drives now do not seem to be working. And if I go up here and do 4 to continue the boot up, even though this is a known good disk, like I just wrote this disk that I'm trying to boot from right now, the boot fails. So before I continue, I think I'm going to have to do some restoration work on these disk drives. I've also noticed that the keyboard sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. It seems to have a loose connector here. And also, it's just filthy. Now that we've got this system proven out and working, I got to focus on cleaning and restoration so that these drives work reliably, and I can continue on with my data recovery. Although I think in the meantime, I'm going to invest in a flux system, like a grease weasel, just because these disks are now close to, if not over 40 years old, and really want to get the data off of them. So, thanks for watching. We will continue next time with some restoration work, either on the keyboard or on the disk drive.